Hi, I'm Jaryd Clifford, Australian Paralympian, visually impaired 1500 metre world record holder and Australian able-bodied champion, and you're listening to Little Athletics Victoria's The Athletics Journey podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome to the first episode of Little Athletics Victoria's podcast, The Athletics Journey. Hosted by me, Lachlan Rayner, this podcast aims to delve into the mindsets of current and former athletes who have made their start in little athletics. We quickly learn that the journey to success for any individual doesn't come without a myriad of highs and lows. This podcast aims to uncover these stories and hopefully give a unique insight into the individuals themselves. And for our first episode of The Athletics Journey, we have a very special guest lined up. Starting their Little Athletics journey at the age of 10, our guest has gone on to success at the world stage. What is even more impressive, though, is that he achieved this status while still being a teenager. Jaryd Clifford has already achieved so much in his sporting life, but as he prepares for the 2020 Paralympic Games in Tokyo, he has been kind enough to agree to sit down and have a chat with myself. And I introduce Jaryd, is sitting just across the table from me. Jaryd, thank you for welcoming me into your home as well.
No, thank you very much for having me. It's always great to be a part of anything that Little Athletics Victoria are doing, so thank you.
Yeah, and I must mention I do come to you a fair bit for different things, with especially with Little Athletics Victoria, and you are nothing but welcoming to whatever I do throw at you. So no, thank you. But we will get into the podcast. And
Awesome.
You have just returned this weekend from Western Australia, the Leonora gift.
Yeah, so I caught the red-eye flight back on Monday, so I'm a bit tired, but we went over there on Thursday with myself, my coach Philo Saunders, my training partner Michael Rogar, and other training partner Keely Small. So we went up a few days earlier than the rest of the races, and we went to the local school in Leonora, which is 70% Indigenous, and we took them through some drills, told them our stories, and basically just spent the whole day with them, which is awesome. The town's amazing, the people are amazing, and the hospitality is also amazing. So the trip in that sense is incredible. The race as well was awesome. Stewie McSwain running a 4:05 mile with 6 180-degree turns is pretty impressive, but I managed to place 6th, but I actually went up there with my main role being as a journalist to cover the event as best I could whilst also racing. So that was my first time writing to deadlines, which was interesting, but usually I write long feature profile pieces for Runners Tribe with, I can set my own deadline. So that was pretty tricky. Stayed up with a few late nights and to make the final against those boys, whenever I can come up against the able-bodied guys, that's pretty special. So 6th there, bit of prize money. So overall, it was a really awesome trip.
And I was just thinking then, you've never really, last time we spoke to you was a couple of years ago, you were still at school. Now you've gone straight out of school and straight into doing work as a journalist. You've never really lived that almost full-time athlete life. Is there anything that you've picked up, whether from school or from being a journalist so far, that has assisted you in athletics at all?
Yeah, well, I think one of the most powerful things about running is that most people have a pretty incredible story, whether it's the reason they got into running or whether it's, just through running itself. And I know that, I love to tell my story if it can help people, and I've met some incredible people through running, but their stories aren't being told as much. And that is changing now. There's, a massive market now for telling people stories with podcasts and other journalistic formats. But I just love meeting people and love getting their story out there, and I think that's super important. But yeah, I only finished high school last year, so I'm in my first semester of uni at the moment as well, which I'm doing pretty well at. So yeah, I don't know, I just enjoy it. I don't think I could just run and that was it.
You probably don't know anything different, but how do you find juggling, I guess, two quite different, you've just come out of school, you were juggling school and being on the world stage at different athletics meets, and now you're doing the same thing but just with a career.
Yeah, I think that's I think there's people that can do the whole elite athlete life, get up, run, sleep, eat, run again, eat, sleep, but I don't know if that's for me. I'm always busy, I'm always doing stuff. Sometimes I do a lot of public speaking as well, at Probus clubs, at schools, and Yeah, if there's a day where I'm not doing anything, it's good. But if it happens more than once day in a row, I usually seem to find a way to keep myself busy. And I think that actually just helps my running, because then I'm not obsessing over my running. I'm not overthinking the little things. I'm just getting out there, running when I need to, and filling in the rest of the day.
So we will go right back, I guess, to the start, your diagnosis with juvenile macular degeneration when you were just 3 years old. Can you talk us through what, I guess, this diagnosis is for those people listening?
Yeah, so if you've ever heard me speak before, you've probably heard this spiel, but it's juvenile macular degeneration, or Best's eye disease. And I was diagnosed when I was 3 years old. So basically it's scar tissue and blistering on the back of the eye, on the macula, that affects my perception, or detail perception, or perception of detail in the central vision. So I can see people's outlines, but I can't maybe see their facial features unless I get super close. So when I'm running, I can only see basically the first person in front of me. Other ways I usually explain it are, if you've ever watched a cop show, and you know how they blur out people's faces, that's I reckon that could be similar. Although I've grown up with it, I don't know any different. I wake up in the morning and that's basically how I've seen for as long as I can remember. So I don't really know how to compare it to normal vision, just because I don't think I've ever experienced it.
And we will fast forward a little bit in your career to the start of Little Athletics. So given it is a Little Ass podcast, we will talk about your journey. And although it wasn't the first sport, you did stumble into Little Athletics as, I believe, around 10, 11 years old.
Yeah, that's it.
How did you get involved first? And do you recall any situations at Little Athletics where you were treated differently because of your condition?
Yeah, so I was at Diamond Valley Little Athletics Club, Greenbrier specifically. And that was my start in athletics. I'd basically stumbled upon it through, school athletics and being, decent there, but also a Paralympic talent search, which basically, indicated that athletics and long distance, middle long distance running would probably be where I'd be at my best in terms of the testing that we'd done there. So in terms of being treated differently though, only positively. The club was amazing. They were super inclusive, super welcoming. They would go out of their way to ensure that I could participate. And I think that having that start in Little Athletics and that being so positive is probably the reason why I'm still in athletics today. I think your enjoyment in the sport is defined in those early years of participation. If you're enjoying it in those early years, it's more likely that you'll enjoy it into your adult career. So I think that is one of the main reasons. I know when I was participating, there was no para events at state championships, and I believe there are now.
Yeah, definitely for the last few years now.
Which is awesome to see, yeah.
There's been different state events, and I think sort of just rolling in this year as well, they're expanding that into cross country. So they're sort of slowly growing their multi-class athletics program within Little Athletics. With Little Athletics, sort of jumping around a little bit here, but with regards to your future athletics ambitions, has Little Athletics played any role in forming those? You did just mention that sort of Little Athletics is quite a big reason why you continued on in athletics as a senior athlete. But are there any other ambitions that you can see that have come about because of your start?
Yeah, I think that's where in those first years of any sport, that's where you start realizing where the sport can take you. You start seeing Olympians and Paralympians coming to your track and talking to you and telling you stories. I think I was young enough to have Brooke Stratton and Damien Birkenhead talk to us, and they'd just been to a world championships or something like that. And I remember hearing their stories and just thinking, if I can do that in this sport, that would be amazing. But also you win a race, and the feeling you get from winning a race is pretty good, and you just want to kind of keep chasing that feeling. And I won my first running race, I think, at Little Athletics, so that kind of fosters that drive to continue to succeed.
Now I want to read you a quote from an article you wrote from Runner's Tribe that struck me, and I sort of underlined it straight away. It is, I wanted to pull on the green and gold. I wanted it fiercely. I dreamt of it, breathed it. I would commentate myself taking Ashes hat tricks against the brick wall and scoring World Cup winners. the round ball hammering into the shed. I was a dreamer. And I think the reason that sort of struck me straight away was the immediate ambitions that you had to represent your country. Can you recall that quote first of all, and can you recall those memories?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Those dreams were probably created even before Little Athletics. I remember in 2005-06, that Ashes that inspired me, Australia won 5-0. I think a year later was the Commonwealth Games in Melbourne and the the Football World Cup with the Socceroos making the knockout stages for still the only time in their history. So I grew up in an era of Australian sport where there were a lot of good things going on, and that as a kid, I listened to SEN, the radio station, all the time. I was obsessed with sport. I was obsessed with getting a green and gold anything, and yeah, even cricket was probably the one that was my first early passion. Dad even built cricket nets, but when you have poor eyesight, it's pretty hard to bat. So I just bowl constantly. But I do recall writing that because when I finally qualified for an Australian team and even the Australian able-bodied team, which I think that quote might have been written after I qualified for that, it's kind of this thing where you're a kid and you dream of it, but in the back of your head, you're never sure if it's going to happen. So for it to happen, it's and especially so young, it's a feeling that's so hard to describe, but it's just amazing.
I just think it's amazing. You hear so many stories of professional athletes recalling their childhood and having stories almost identical to this where they grew up, or they've got photos or videos in the backyard where they're wearing a baggy green or in Australian kit or supporting their favourite athlete at an Olympic Games. And yeah, that just struck me straight away. Still staying on as a child, you have written and spoken about the deterioration of your condition through primary school. Yep. Can you briefly explain that?
Yeah, so my condition is degenerative, or it has the ability to deteriorate, and throughout my life it has done so. So when I was in primary school, mid-primary school, probably around the time leading into me starting Little Athletics, I was still doing a lot of ball sports at the time. Before that. So basically, I remember that I used to read the paper every morning, or at least on weekends, but I think it was every morning, and I'd run out before school and I'd open it up, unwrap it, and read the sports section. And that's probably why I'm so passionate about journalism as well. But I remember one morning that I woke up and I was finding it even harder to read the print, even with my magnifier. So basically what had happened was, I think it's like the blister had burst. I think that's the terminology that's thrown around by the doctors, although I don't quite understand it myself. But basically the blur intensified to a point where I thought my glasses were super dirty, but they weren't. And basically it's a life-changing moment where you kind of have to assess or reassess everything that you're doing and try and work out if that's going to still be possible. And if it's not possible, are there ways to adapt yourself to that? So, so ball sports obviously became a lot harder. So that's probably one of the other reasons that I stumbled upon athletics, which is probably a blessing. As much as a deterioration in eyesight's not great, it's nearly a blessing because I actually then stumbled upon athletics, which it's probably the sport that I am best at.
It was in the same article that you wrote, the previous quote about having the dream. You use the phrase heartbroken when you found out at the later stages of primary school that ball sports probably wouldn't have been something that you could go on and do in the future. Was that something that sort of swayed you into athletics?
Yeah, definitely. I think heartbroken is probably the right word. And if you ask Mum, I probably acted quite heartbroken as well when I it wouldn't have been straight away. It just was more in the weeks afterwards when it kind of sets in that realization that I'm probably not going to open the batting on Boxing Day or score a goal in the World Cup for the Socceroos. Like, it's pretty clear that that's not going to happen when you can't even see the ball. So athletics is a sport that's so simple in its function or in its, how you go about it, that it allows such inclusivity. So obviously I don't need to see a ball. All I need to do is, run as quick as I can. So that's how I, stumbled upon athletics. But I was talking to James Hansen, who came second at the Leonora Mile on the flight home, and we were saying that those moments where you're heartbroken or you're going through a really tough time, during it sucks. It's really hard. It's something that you obviously don't want to be going through. But you take a step back 5 years later and you look back at that time and you probably think, you know what, if I didn't have that, I wouldn't be the person I am today. And it's probably made you a better person. And I think for me, having that heartbreak has actually made my life better in a lot of senses.
And you mentioned before your mother there. You must have had, and still do have, a great support network around you. Can you just briefly talk us through, do you have brothers, sisters?
Yeah, so I got a sister, Elsie. So she's a pole vaulter and she actually gets about top 5 at nationals, which is awesome. So she's always down the track with me. Great support. Dad's running as well. He trains at the same time as me, same tracks most of the time, and he does a long run on Sundays, and he's gearing up for a marathon at the end of the year. So now he can't get out of it that I've said that on a podcast. But
Good.
Mum as well is running a lot as well, but she's been, along with Dad, my main support network throughout life. So basically from as early as I can remember, I didn't even realize that my vision was that much different to other people, because they were just throwing me out there, making sure that I wasn't wrapped up in cotton wool, making sure that I was getting the same experiences as my peers. And they also realized that, like, the reality is one of the easiest way to make friends at primary school is to, do sport and play sport at lunchtime with people. So Mum taught me how to throw and catch a ball using, what I had, which is a little bit harder, I suppose, than other people. But something as simple as that got me my friendship group that went through all of primary school, and it got me into sport, and it's probably given me the confidence, because I had friends to put myself out there and tell my story now. So there's a lot of things like that. Mum was very adamant that I learn Braille, and I know enough now that if I ever do need it as my main source of reading, I reckon I'd be able to pick it up pretty quickly. So Mum's she set me up quite well to tackle life.
And who'd you get the running ability from?
Yeah, well, this one's an interesting one. So Dad always, he'll hate me saying this, and I love saying it though. He reckons he went to school with Rod de Hyden, who's an Olympic marathon runner. I think he went to Sydney, and Dad reckons he might have beaten him in one race ever. So maybe Dad was good. And then Dad...
Well, it's on the record now.
I'll say that. I'll also say, though, apparently he was sick, but Dad will still claim it. So Mum's dad, though, on the other side, was also a good runner as well. So my pa. So we're not sure. Maybe it's a bit of both.
Before we get into some of your achievements, sort of thinking about this on the way over to do this podcast, if you were... almost some role play here. If you were sitting on the opposite side of the table from a potential employer, say for News Limited, wanted to hire you, and they got into the room and they said, "Hi, Jaryd, can you introduce yourself?" How would you introduce yourself to someone that might not necessarily be from an athletic background?
Yeah, I'd say, "Hi, I'm Jaryd Clifford. I'm a Paralympian. I'm passionate about storytelling. I'm passionate about uncovering everyday stories that happen all around us that people just don't know about." And that's probably my journalist, what I'm passionate about doing there, because everyone has a story. It's just, and we're surrounded by people with stories, but not all the time do we know what they are. And that's what I'd say. I'd just be super upfront and honest. But yeah, I think I'd also let them know that I've travelled the world since I was 15 years old. This is going to be my first full winter in Australia since I was 15. So I've met a lot of incredible people, and I think I've got some good life experiences to help that.
Yeah, that's, I think where I was trying to go with that question, I was trying to determine sort of whether you would introduce yourself as a runner or a Paralympian or whether you would sort of whether you were someone that didn't like to tell people those kinds of things, but it is, I guess it's a testament to who you are and what you've achieved and why you agreed to do these kinds of things, especially, and you go over and help different communities that you sort of, that you are really proud of who you are.
That's
and
it,
although like any athlete, there's highs and lows. You are there to sort of tell your story, and you're still really writing the book anyway. So
That's it, yeah.
that's where I was going with that question. But we will go to the Rio Paralympic Games, where you competed in the T13 1500 and the T13 5000 meters. Now, I've been involved in running since I was 5. And I couldn't tell you, although I know what these ones mean in particular, I couldn't tell you the classification. So can you run through real quickly what the classifications are in Paralympic?
Yeah, so at the Paralympic Games, there's a lot of numbers and it can be confusing, but once you know about it, I think it's actually quite easy. So so my category is T12. So the 1 is vision impaired at the start. So there's 3 vision impaired categories, T11, 12, and 13. So T11 is totally blind, and then T12 and 13 are visually impaired. So T11, so 1, the first one is vision impaired. The second one, because it's lower than 2 and 3, is the most severe. So the lower the second number, the more severe, and then the first number indicates what type of disability. So at the Rio Paralympics, T12 and 13 are combined though, because visually impaired, when we don't have to run in lanes, it's basically the same. Then there's T20, which is intellectual disability, which only has 1 category. Then the 30s, with the 3 at the front, is cerebral palsy. So there's up till 34, that's in wheelchairs, and then 35 to 38 is ambulant, and 8 being the highest number, that's the least severe, and 1 is the most severe. And the 40s is called les autres, I think, which is just basically other. So there's a dwarfism, arm amputation, and leg amputation spread throughout there. And then the 50s is wheelchair. So Richard Coleman, who's a great friend of Little Athletics.
Ambassador for Little Athletics Victoria as well.
There you go, ambassador. So he's a 53, I believe, and someone like Kurt Fernley is a 54, but they usually race together. So hopefully that clears it up a little bit, but it is a little bit confusing, but once you get the gist of it.
I do think it's something that you might not naturally come straight away to people, but if you do just sit down and spend 20 minutes trying to work it out, you will get it, and it sort of does make sense once you...
I think when it's written down as well in front of you, it's a little bit easier.
And these international competitions, you run within the same classification, whereas domestically they do all kinds of things where you always constantly, if you ever sit at one of these meets, you always hear the commentators announce over the PA, this person might have crossed the line first, but there will be some form of calculation that does work out where they actually sort of place in relation to their classification. Yeah,
so domestically at a national championships, we don't quite have the depth to give out medals for each category. So someone like Michael Roger and myself, our world records are basically 0.2 seconds the difference. So in a race, if I beat him by 0.1 of a second, he'd probably actually get the gold medal, because my world record's slightly faster, and it goes on for this percentage system of how close to the world record you've gotten. But internationally, if you cross the line first, you are the champion. So in Tokyo or in Dubai later this year at the World Championships, if I was to cross the line first, that would be the final result, because you're only competing against the people in your classification, which is way better and way easier for the crowd to understand as well, which is good.
Talk us through the Rio Paralympic Games. So where'd you place? How'd you go? You ran both the 1500 meters and 5000.
Yeah, so Rio was incredible. That's probably why I introduced myself, as a Paralympian, because it's something that has defined my even thought process. Whenever I woke up in the years leading into Rio, it was written on my whiteboard, Rio 2016. The first camp I did after the talent search that got me into athletics was a camp called Road to Rio. So ever since I got into the sport, all I could think about was Rio. So to finally qualify, which was a pretty, touch and go process, arriving there, if you haven't been to an Olympics or a Paralympics, what must go into organising it is just phenomenal. We got a massive welcome at the airport. We got a bus in its own lane on the highway to the Olympic Village. The Olympic Village itself is like this city of incredibly diverse people, nationality-wise, but also just an incredibly diverse, group of people in regards to the disabilities they have and the stories that they must have as well. But you go out into the stadium for your race, and the tickets were a lot cheaper for the Paralympics than the Olympics, so our crowds were actually quite good. And I've never run in front of more than 100 people before that, so I think it was maybe 30 to 40,000 people on the night of my 1500, and I just remember walking out and being so overwhelmed by the flashing lights, the colours, all of it nearly felt like you weren't running a race. It nearly felt like you were a part of a show, which I suppose you are at that level. And I remember being on the start line and we had 2 Brazilians in the race, and I've been to, AFL matches where Carlton Collingwood, 80,000 people, and that's loud, but being in the middle of it all, it's so incredibly loud. When they introduced the Brazilians, the crowd, it was actually quite kind of scary. When the cheer goes up for the local runner, it's kind of like you want it to stop during it, but then when it stops, you want to hear it again. And they also led the first few laps. So I remember, because I rely on my hearing in all other races, I remember getting to about 100 meters in and going, oh, geez, I'm not going to be able to use my hearing. So it's this completely different context of racing compared to athletics in general usually. But it was amazing, yeah.
I can only imagine in situations like that where probably the biggest race, no doubt, of your career to date, you're spending, and one that you probably want to spend or take 100% of your focus on the race ahead. You've got all these other things going on in the background that are probably distracting you, I guess, in a way, that you can't train for, really.
No.
What other situation are you going to be put in like that? I can't even
it's crazy.
understand it.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, I was standing on that start line and I was distracted. That would be the word that I'd use. I was looking around. There was an American guy next to me, and I just remember saying to him, like, man, how crazy is this? And he's like fully in the zone, which I probably should have been. But I was also, when that noise subsides and you kind of got that 20-second period where, the starter will call you to the marks and the gun will go, I remember it hitting me at that moment how many people were watching, how many people back at school had gotten up early to watch it, how many people were kind of, although they wouldn't admit it, invested in how well I'd perform. And then I was like thinking, geez, what happens if I come last on the biggest race of my life? And there are all of these little things that you just shouldn't be thinking about. But I was. I still ran well. I still came 7th out of, I think, 14 runners. And I came 7th again in the 5,000 meters. But it's probably not what you want going through your mind. But Athletics Australia had actually said to me about 6 months before that they probably wanted me to maybe give Rio a miss and just focus on continuing to develop and not overtrain and all of those things, those precautionary kind of reasons.
How did that make you feel?
Yeah, it wasn't great at the time. I could kind of understand the logic of why they'd said that, because I was a 4:13 1500 meter runner. The B qualifier was 4 minutes, but I came out a week later and ran a 14-second PB, as you do at that age. So I did qualify, but in hindsight, I'm so happy I went, because now when I front up at Tokyo in 2020, I've already been able to soak up all of that pre-race kind of energy. And now when I stand on the start line in Tokyo, I know that I'll be fully focused, and I know that whatever is going on around me, it's just outside noise, and I'll be so in the zone that hopefully I'll be able to get the job done so that I can soak it up afterwards. And I think if I didn't have that in Rio, I would have stood on the start line in Tokyo and I would have been freaking out, because it would have been my first experience in that environment. So I'm super stoked that I've already had that experience.
And that, I believe here in Australia, the Rio Paralympic Games was the first time I was broadcast on Network 7.
Yeah.
So already made it much bigger here in Australia, locally at least, and also got the attention from being faster than, I think I'm correct in saying this, faster than the 1500 meter final, able-bodied final as well. So it did bring on a fair bit of attention. So you sort of lumped it all in one championship. Just quickly, we'll go back to the previous year. You did the IPC World Champion.
Yeah, that's right.
Bit of a funny story qualifying for that one. Did you want to let people know?
So I realized I wasn't going to qualify for the 1500 at that stage. I just wasn't quick enough. So my coach had Diamond Valley, Max Bolchin, had looked through the qualifiers, and we saw the 5K, and I think the qualifier was 16:15, which is about 2 minutes slower than the qualifier these days. But I was like, geez, that probably isn't too hard. So I decided to run 2 5Ks. I was pretty young to be doing that, but I gave it a crack and qualified. And then I got a message from my mate probably a month out from the championships, and he goes, have you seen the new qualifiers? They've made it a minute quicker. So I hadn't run the qualifier officially. They'd actually stuffed up which categories were combined somehow, not realising for 6 or 7 months. So AA hadn't realised that the IPC had stuffed up either, so AA didn't even know. So I had to ring them, and AA were really good. They sorted me out, and I actually ended up debuting for Australia, being 45 seconds outside the international qualifier. But because we were in winter in Australia, there was no chance for me to have another crack, and the IPC recognised that stuffed up. So I was also lucky to actually get that first championships. The stuff up probably helped me out.
And then we'll skip back ahead of the 2016 Paralympic Games to the 2017 World Para-Athletics Championships in London. You mentioned that there's a fair bit going on when you step onto the Olympic Games track in terms of things that probably, affect every professional athlete, not necessarily something that you train for. I believe you got in touch with a psychologist.
Yeah, that's right.
In between. Who was that? How'd that come about?
Yeah, so basically after Rio, with all those nerves and, even when I put my front foot forward on your marks, it was shaking uncontrollably. So I kind of realised at that point that I probably needed to sort out my mental state when I was, lining up for big races like that, if I wanted to be at the top, because I think the best athletes are often the ones that are best prepared mentally. So got in touch with the Victorian Institute of Sport that have been, I've been a scholarship holder with since I was 15, and they have a sports psychologist there called Mark Spargo, and it only took one meeting for my whole career to change, basically, from this one piece of advice. It's so simple. It's probably Psychology 101. Most people have probably heard it. It's just focus on the process and not the outcome. And it's so simple, but instead of me being on the start line in Rio stressing about what people are going to think, how much time people have invested in me, how much support, what it means for them, how many people are watching, what position I'm going to come, instead of thinking about all those outcome-based things, all I should be thinking about is, what do I need to do to execute the best performance? What do I need to do in the first 100 meters? And after that first 100 meters, what do I got to do the next 100 meters? And it will kind of flow on. And it's something so simple that it can be applied to anything in life. So I did year 12 exams last year, and instead of stressing about my ATAR, stressing about my scores in each subject, I was focused on the process of studying and the process of being best prepared. And it's just like very simple, but something that, if applied to anything in life, will probably make the outcome better anyway. So I remember lining up at the next year's World Championships in 2017, and I remember being on the start line, and I was nearly nervous because I was so calm. It was like eerily calm, but I performed probably one of the best races that I've done, so it clearly works.
So that was in London, where you placed third in the T13 1500 353.31, and probably put a target on your back really now for all future, not just that performance there, but a number of other ones as well. You're going to go into, I guess, your next big world championships events as not just that, I guess, little kid almost that no one really knew, or now as being the guy to chase.
Yeah, so I remember London, I was completely the underdog until maybe the morning of, when someone must have looked through the rankings list and realised I was ranked towards the top. But and they put out a post, which made me pretty nervous. But now that I've bronze medal there.
Does that change your focus going into the event, now knowing that people are maybe going to use you a little bit more going into races in terms of maybe sitting off the back of you?
Maybe, yeah. And I think anyway, tactically, that's probably going to be my best bet. There's a twin Algerian brothers. One of the Russians has returned from the he didn't test positive, but obviously the Russians were banned for a while from the Paralympics, so he's returned. And they're all 400-meter runners as well, or 800-meter runners. So my best bet is probably to lead it out. So that kind of takes the pressure off. I think I've proven now, though, that even to myself, that I perform best under pressure at nationals. I tend to do my best race of the season, and I've seemed to perform well at all major championships. So I think I kind of thrive under that pressure. So that's the thing, though, when you publicise your story so much, people start to realise that you're probably one of the favourites, whereas the guys out of Africa, I don't really read many articles about them. I don't really know what's going on in their training. So anything can happen. That's the Paralympics. My mate's been a world record holder for 5 years and only just won his first world title. So I will go into the race knowing that anything can happen, and by no ways thinking that I can just win. It's going to be a massive fight for that gold medal, as it was in 2016.
And you hear with, I guess, big team sports, there's quite a bit of focus when you talk to any key people, coaches, etc. They do quite a bit of research on their next competitors coming up. How much do you know, or do you do any research or analysis, I guess, on your competitors, or it doesn't really make much of a difference?
Yeah, it's not like able-bodied athletics where every result is scrutinised and like everyone just knows about it. Unless you run in an IPC Grand Prix or a highly sanctioned meet, the times won't count. It took me until my 8th time breaking the world record for it to be ratified. So I don't know. Like I won't be doing my research into their little results, but most of them have run major championships before. So I'll just base it off that being their top fitness. Most of them are at that age where it's probably hard to have a massive improvement from that. So yeah, it's a hard one. It's tricky, but maybe that actually is liberating, because we don't have the opportunity to overthink the people that we're versing. We've just got to get out there and try and get to the finish line as quick as possible.
And domestically, you compete in all the different track and field events on offer, really.
Yeah.
Do you do much research on those kinds of athletes, or it's a bit easier because you sort of probably know them a little bit better?
I suppose with Australian domestic athletics, there's that small group of people that do all of the high meets, and you don't even nearly have to do your research. It's kind of like you just know it because you were either in the race or someone told you on a long run. But I don't tend to overthink who I'm racing. That's the simplicity of the sport. I suppose if you're trying to win a national title, tactics do matter. But if you're just trying to run as quick as possible, that's all you've really got to do. So I suppose I don't try and overthink that kind of stuff, yeah.
I was listening to another podcast you were doing. I was listening only the other day, and you were mentioning how you could recognise different stride patterns or different breathing patterns of other competitors. Is that something that you have sort of grown with over your journey in athletics to assist you competing?
Yeah, I suppose the thing that helped that, and it's changing now when I'm racing interstate. There's obviously people that I only race maybe once a year. But back in Victoria as a junior, you run against the same guys at every state championships and every cross-country race. And basically every time you race, the people lining up next to you are the same people. So through that, I actually started being able to know who was surrounding me in the pack just, by their breathing sound and their footfall sound. So that was actually really cool. It's a lot harder though now, as I said, but the guys that I train with, the guys that I long run with, everyone has a unique kind of sound to me. But I have to be running with you or having raced against you a few times for that to kind of work though. So internationally, the guys, it's going to be too loud anyway in Tokyo, but internationally it's a little bit hard just because I don't have the para athletics doesn't have the opportunities yet where we can race each other on a regular basis.
Now, with athletics and any professional sport or any person in particular, really, it's great to celebrate the real highs of what you've been able to achieve. And we do read all about that. And it's great to see. Unfortunately, though, what comes with that is we also have the lows. One theme or one event sort of sticks out to me that you have mentioned a number of times is the Hunter Track Classic event back in January 2018.
Yeah, it would be.
What happened there?
Yeah, so I'm stubbornly independent as a person, and I think that is born out of how mum and dad raised me in, not thinking that I needed help unless I actually did need help. So I always found running as, especially around a track where you don't have to see that much to run, I always found running as that outlet of freedom. And Hunter Track Classic 5,000 metres, it was probably a mistake to try and run there. I was trying to run a World Junior qualifier, which I was probably beyond my ability in the 5K, but it was dark. The track wasn't super well lit. It's a great meet, but the lighting's not super good for me. And basically got halfway around the race and ran into the back of a few people. And as I fatigue, my vision gets a little bit worse, or it's harder to focus. So I just got disorientated. I panicked. The crowd was in maybe lane 4, maybe even lane 3. And I just remember feeling a little bit claustrophobic. I was hitting the rail, knocking over cones. I took the corner at the wrong trajectory and even ran onto the inside. So having that happen is, especially when people are watching, that's kind of tough to handle. I don't think I slept for 2 nights after that, just because the thoughts going through your head are the thing that you use to overcome your adversity, which is running, was now also serving you a dose of adversity. And for me, that was, nearly not a slap in the face, but actually no, it probably was, because I think I trusted running. It seems weird to say this, but I kind of trusted it. But as I said earlier in the podcast, those moments that are really hard to handle at the time and are really low moments, probably the lowest in my career, have actually, created this situation at the moment where my training partner for the last, 5 or 6 years, Tim Logan, will line up with me on the start line of the World Championships and in Tokyo, because I'm now using guide runners for 5,000 meters, which is way easier for me, way better for me, way better tactically as well as physically. And I get to have my best mate on the start line in Tokyo. So it was a low moment, but a lot of the low moments then create high moments.
So really, I was thinking it when you said it earlier on in the podcast, a really mature way to, think of it, and probably something that a lot of top professional athletes don't really hit that point and in their careers, and you've hit it so early. Does that help you now when you might experience a bad race or have a mishap at training or something like that that is not positive? Do you immediately think, well, hang on, these kinds of things have happened previously, and in 2 years' time, 3 years, 4 years, they're now a learning experience, and I value that moment because that then went on to help me be better or perform better in this situation?
Yeah, and I think that's the lucky thing with having all of these doses of adversity, because I've come out of it pretty well, obviously. So I think and it's another thing of just going along with the process. So if something bad happens, it seems to be a part of that process, and there's no point stressing about the outcome. For instance, you've got an injury, it sucks, especially if it's in the lead up to a major championships, but you got an injury, there's not a lot you can do about it other than just kind of ride it out. So I don't find any reason to, obviously you're going to be annoyed, and that's totally understandable and fair, but after a while it's probably no point getting down in the dumps, because it's just the way life's turned out in that moment. So yeah, I don't know if it's just because I've had those experiences already and early on in my life that's why I can do that now, but I find it very helpful.
We'll get out of the negative stuff because I think that's enough for the podcast now. The Australian Under-20 1500 metre championships, your final year as a junior competitor, and the Sydney Grand Prix weekend must be one that will sit in the memory bank for quite some time. Tell us about that weekend, what the results were, what your recollection is.
Yeah, it was a crazy weekend. I went into that not expecting to qualify for World Junior Championships. Obviously, as a para athlete, no one had done it in the history of athletics for the World Juniors. So I didn't have a qualifier. 4 other blokes did in the race, and I got through my heats only just on the Thursday, and then the national finals on the Friday. I think I was still dead last with 700 meters to go in the 15, and somehow I have no recollection of how it happened, but I crossed the line in first place, but still not with the qualifier. So I was pretty emotional because winning an able-bodied national title was something that I'd always dreamt of, but it was actually one of those dreams that you just never thought would happen. It was just cool to pump yourself up before a race. But so people kept coming up to me, they were like, oh, there's this Sydney Grand Prix tomorrow, you should try and get into it. And I was like, oh, I'm pretty tired, my legs are pretty cooked, I don't want to be too greedy, I'm already pretty pumped with this national title, I don't want to kind of go and have a bad race and ruin that feeling. So I actually had an Ed Sheeran concert booked that night. So I went to it, and Philo Saunders, my coach, messaged me, I reckon, at 1 a.m. and said, oh, you should probably get home and have some sleep. You're in the Sydney Grand Prix tomorrow night. And that was the final day in the qualifying period. So I was, I probably slept not long, maybe 5 or 6 hours, and ended up running the race that's still my PB over a year later, which was 3:45. Ended up getting the qualifier by 3 seconds. I was lining up next to the Olympic champion Matt Centrowitz. So in 24 hours, I'd gone from being last in the national under-20 final to standing on the start line next to the Olympic champion. 24 hours later. So it's probably one day in my life that's completely just changed it, because me qualifying for that, I ended up, being promoted as the first person to ever make a World Junior Championships as a para athlete or Paralympian. So it's probably one of the major highlights of my career, but it's also probably made me a little bit more well known internationally as well, which is handy when you're trying to find sponsorships and etc.
And you also competed in that same race with a training partner, Michael Roger, and coach.
Yeah, so
Philo Saunders.
That's probably the most cool part about it all, the most special part. Philo went out with the pace, so Rogues sat behind him, and he's in this fluoro bright Brooks singlet, which was handy because I could then see him in the dark. And then I went behind him, and Rogues and I finished within 0.2 of each other, both breaking our world records. And Philo was, ran 3:48 at the age of 42. So to finish across the line with your, two of the most special people to you in the running world, I don't even know if that'll ever happen again. It was just everything was perfect about that weekend.
What was the aftermath of that race? Do you remember what was said, what happened?
Philo, I remember, crossed the line, and I think he swore a few times maybe. He was pretty pumped for me, and Rogues was in a little bit of shock, and I had a couple of guys from my training group there, and there was a lot of hugs. And I actually remember knowing that when I crossed the line, I'd gotten the World Junior qualifier because someone had turned around and said it to me. Because everyone in that race knew what I was trying to go for. But then I think it was David Tarbotton from Athletics New South Wales then told me the time, and it was 3 seconds quicker than I'd even expected. And I remember just collapsing the ground, hitting the ground. It was just this moment that you dream about. It's like the ultimate scenario that then plays out in real life. And I remember my dad flew up after the national title win. He actually flew up the morning of the 3:45 race, the world record race. So he had flown up, and my first coach was there as well. It was just this amazing thing where all the supporters that you have in the whole of the running community are all there to see you do probably the best run of your life thus far.
Did you have any inkling going into the race that you sort of had that performance in you?
Not a chance, because I knew I'd run what I thought was really well all kind of year, and I'd just not been getting close to the qualifier, which is 3:48. So to run 3:45, especially my third race in 3 days, I think it proves what adrenaline can do, because I was pretty pumped leading into the race. So I think adrenaline probably carried me over the line. So I'm trying to replicate that in races now, because it's still my PB.
That one was obviously quite a big high in your career. Are there any others that you can recall off the top of your head?
Yeah, I think my first medal at World Champs in 2017, the bronze. That one is actually really strange, because I have zero recollection of that probably 15-minute period from the gun, and I think that's because it's the race that I was most in the zone for. From the gun, the next thing I remember is being I'm on the fence, and Philo and the whole Australian team is just slapping me on the back, grabbing me, hugging me, and I don't even know how I got that medal. I've seen the video, but I just don't remember it. But I just know the feeling of achieving something with all the early mornings and all of the mileage, and a lot of it was on my own during that period. It's special for that to all be worthwhile.
And apart from the Hunter Track Classic, were there any, and it's hard because you have achieved all of this in such a short sort of space of time, but are there any sort of extended periods of time where you've almost not given up as per se, but thought it's all getting too difficult?
Yeah, I think that whole 6 months leading into Rio, with maybe I was being dramatic, but I kind of felt like people were doubting me, whether I could do it, and I also then got injured, so Athletics Australia were a little bit correct. It's the only time I've ever been injured, and I never got a diagnosis because I was too scared that I would be left off the team if people found out. But I couldn't train for 6 weeks leading into, I think I ran for the first time the day before I left. So I've never had an injury before, and I just trained my butt off in the pool. But that's probably the only time where I've kind of thought, geez, if this doesn't go well in Rio, I don't know. It was too scary to think about. I was training purely from fear of what people would think if I failed in Rio. So sometimes that could get overwhelming, but I think now running is such a lifestyle as well as a career that it'll always be a part of life somehow, whether it's through riding or doing it or, yeah.
The 2020 Paralympic Games in Tokyo. Talk us through the process, the selection process there.
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to. It's very different to the Olympics. We don't have any of that new point system, and our qualifiers for me should be pretty cruisy. They haven't been released as of yet, but with me being the world record holder, I should be totally fine in qualifying via that. We might not find out though until maybe a couple of months out. There was talk that a medal at World Champs would be automatic selection, so I could have it ticked off as early as November. But Tokyo, every session that we're doing right now, although even we have World Champs, but every session now, everything that we do running wise, all the things that I'm doing, just in life basically, is leading up to Tokyo. I can't even think beyond that at the moment, uni wise or work wise or anything. So everything's geared towards that. It's on my whiteboard that I want to win a gold medal, and I think everyone does that goes, but I'll be doing 2 events, 1500 and 5K. My best one's the 1500. So the gold that I'll be dreaming of is in that one, but I'll have Tim and Philo guiding me in the 5K, and they get medals as well if I do. So I would love for them to also get a gold medal.
What's the biggest learning you'll take, and it might be now or it might be sort of something that's a little bit closer to the event? What's the biggest learning out of the 2016 games that you will take into the 2020?
Yeah, I think that obviously process an outcome, but we've touched on that. So another one would be probably embracing the pressure. I was always scared of pressure, but now I think I've proven to myself many times in sport and out of sport that I tend to perform well under pressure. So I think just when I'm on that start line or in the days leading up to it and I'm feeling that pressure, which will inevitably come no matter how mentally prepared you are, I think just knowing that that's when I best perform. Just confidence and self-belief, believing in yourself. And Philo is the best person to have in the days leading into a race, because he, even if you are not the favourite, he'll make you believe that you are the favourite, or he'll make you believe that you have the ability to win, which is exactly what you want in the days leading into the biggest race of your life.
One last question. Where would you like to see Paralympic sports and athletes with a disability head in the future? So if you could sort of wave a magic wand or see the future, where would you like, I guess, a sport that you're quite heavily involved in be in, let's say, 5 years' time?
Yeah, I think athletics is the main sport at the Paralympics for sure. So where it's heading now is where I wanted to keep heading. So 2008, Beijing, there was 30 minutes of coverage, a night, highlights across all events. ABC for 2012 showed, I think, maybe 7 hours of delayed-ish coverage, although I might be wrong, but it wasn't as good as 2016, which was, I think, 14 hours of live coverage on Channel 7. So the trajectory of that is trickling down as well. So I was the only member of the Victorian cross-country team for any age in 2012, I think. So I was the only para-athlete. And now there are people that will run the state trials that won't qualify because there's that many people. They fill out the team. So that's another one. Little athletics, obviously, as I said before, there was no events for me. And now there are events, and even in cross-country, which is incredible. So the participation numbers are climbing, the opportunities are climbing, which is what will bring the numbers, and also the coverage. And I think when people, and I know that people are realising this and have been for a while now, us Paralympians, we are elite athletes that just had a barrier or a bit of adversity to overcome. And we're not inspirational for just simply being there. If we're going to be inspirational for anything, it's the same as what an Olympian would be for, and that is getting out there, doing the best that we can. And I know that attitude is being, accepted by everyone. Like, we are elite athletes as well, and I think that's awesome to be a part of. And this kind of rise or revolution of the Paralympic world is so good for society as a large, but also our sport.
Well, thank you for, first off, welcoming me into your home, but sharing a little bit of your story. No doubt it's resonated with heaps of people within the Little Athletics Victoria community, but in the broader community as well, who have shared your story, shared your journey, parts of it, and no doubt will continue to do so long into the future with the big world events in the coming years, but everything else in between as well. So that's all we've got time for on the first episode of The Athletics Journey. Thanks to Jaryd for speaking with us and providing us with some unique insights on your sporting journey so far. You can stay up to date with Jaryd's progress by following him online, which we'll provide links to in the description. If you like what you've heard, be sure to subscribe now on your favourite podcast app to make sure that you don't miss out what we have in store.